Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of The Followers. Today we're joined by guest Stephen Behan, who's going to draw on all of his previous experiences working as a GPO, hosting the Coach and Bubble podcast and his own PhD research looking at fundamental movement skills. Stephen, very welcome aboard.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me, lads.
Before, we might as well just go stuck straight in. If you want to give us some of your background around getting into your first GPO role and how that brought you forward into your research area then.
Yeah, no problem at all. So I probably took a not a very straightforward route into what I'm doing at the moment. A cabinet maker, started out as a cabinet maker by trade. Do that for a while, and then went traveling Australia, across Asia, and the usual, and then came back, and I decided that I wanted to do something different. And the GPO roles were just sort of coming online. I was in maybe the second wave of games promotion officers, for anyone who's not familiar with them, for Dublin GAA. So that's how I started getting into. I'd coached up to that. I'd done plenty of coaching, but I suppose the GPO role then really focused. That was my job, basically, was to promote Gaelic games as best I could. So if anyone is familiar with the system in Dublin, it's brilliant. Like, it really is brilliant. Like, nearly every school, a primary school in the county, gets coaching on a regular basis, and provides a real good outlet. And I got to see a huge range of that. I suppose we started off in Trinity Gales and St Monica's, so two areas in the north side of Dublin. Some of the schools that I would have been working in would have been classed in the DESH bands, like, so disadvantaged areas. But the people that were running those clubs they were absolute heroes. They were phenomenal. Like, they're keeping the show on the road and providing an unbelievable outlet to kids in certain areas, not all of them, but in certain areas, and keeping those kids engaged. And but then I also got to see the total other end of the spectrum. I was then in Clontarf GA club. So Clontarf would be a really good area in terms of demographics, and the challenge then was numbers, as in they had huge numbers, and it was, how do you cope with numbers? How do you keep the quality of coaching as high as possible with those big numbers? And how do you put structures in place to ensure you keep as many of those numbers as you possibly can throughout? So, yeah, I think that's about 10 years of my life in 2 minutes there, John.
Your own club is Nafina, isn't it?
That's right, yeah, that's right.
You'd be a very large club as well. You'd have like a GPO in place and all.
Yeah, 100%. We're massive, and it's funny enough now. Like, I know, I'm not sure when this has gone out of that, but last year, even through COVID, we actually grew in numbers, which was mental. Our nursery was probably the only thing that was on. So when we came back after the summer, before the schools locked down again, we set up our nursery. Our nursery used to be 9:30 to 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and now, when we were allowed to do it, it was we started at 8:30 and ran till 12, because we had to make it socially distant, pods of etc. And the numbers just exploded. The girl side in particular, we now have more girls than boys in some sections of the nursery, which is fantastic. And I think it's a blend of, there wasn't a huge amount on, and a lot of indoor activities had been cancelled, or they weren't able to continue. And also the guys who organised the nursery down there, a guy called Michael Carr is the coordinator, and our GPO Mark McManus, they're just phenomenal, and they just put on such a really cool service, really age appropriate. They support the coaches, they support the parents, and yeah, it's been brilliant to see. My own niece is now first year of the nursery, so that's my Saturday mornings taken up now for the foreseeable. But it's great to see. It really was, like, especially with all the dourness of COVID and lockdown and stuff. But it was great to see on a Saturday morning, and you could get down and so in a socially distant and safe manner see the kids flourish,
And just when you were in Clontarf, would Jack McCaffrey have been coming through at that stage? Were you the one who put a football in his hand first?
I wish I could say that. No. Jack was well on his way by the time I arrived there. But his family have been huge. Noel would have been one of the drivers of the nursery in Clontarf from back in the day. And Noel actually was I think he was one of the main proponents of the Go games when they were actually originated. Himself and Niall Minor, I think, did an awful lot of work on them and small-sided games. And Noel used to have the kids turn up to nursery with a red sock on their strong foot and a white sock on their weaker foot, and stuff like that for working on skills and stuff like that. Again, they're very lucky to have a phenomenal nursery coordinator down there, a guy by the name of Matt O'Neill, who just he's just incredible. He just drives it, and there's no let up. But also he's fantastic at engaging the young people in the club, the transition years, the teenagers, and he drags them down on a Saturday morning, which is no mean feat. But the kids respond to the younger crowd so well, and you just see. You can see those numbers coming through. They're going to have a bright future ahead as a club, I think, in terms of the success and the amount of kids that they're bringing through.
It's a brilliant experience for T-Wise as well to get in there and be on the ground and see, like, just even developing people skills with showing the younger people what to do and stuff and all like that, and dealing with the odd tantrum and everything as well.
Yeah, dealing with parents as well. A lot of life lessons learned for them.
Yeah, it's invaluable, I suppose, if you're in fourth year and you're thinking, oh, I'd like to do coaching along the line. It's a big kind of, oh, this is actually what coaching is really about moment when you're doing it with kids, as regards to like them seeing coaches at a professional level on TV being like, oh, sure, you're just a tactics man. Whereas there's so much more that goes into it, and it's good to learn that before you kind of made any career decision.
100%. And we would have gone into the schools and we would have given them like a foundation course, so that like they'd get their certificate at the end of it, and they did like the Garda vetting and the child safeguarding and all that sort of stuff. And as well as that, then we'd team up with the school and we'd sign off for their volunteer hours for their Gashka award and stuff like that. So you make it a really complimentary process, and it's everybody's getting something out of it. And the kids originally sign up for 12 weeks, but most of them would keep coming for throughout, and it's testament to Matt and the gang that are down there that they just, the environment was so welcoming and fun. They really enjoy it, like they mightn't enjoy getting up on the Saturday morning, but once they were there, they actually really enjoyed getting stuck in and having the crack with the kids.
That Gashka link is so important, because I even see now with the Future Leaders programme, which I think, if done well, can really dovetail that link between schools and coaching at a young age and bring it across into the younger schools then as well. From all of the coaching you did, that kind of led you on to do a little bit more research and stuff, particularly the masters you went into there in UCD. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you got into it first?
Yeah, so like, I suppose I was in the doing a GPO job for nearly 10 years at that stage, and don't get me wrong, I loved that job. Like, I really, really did enjoy it. But at the same time, it's a young person's game sometimes, because you'd be in with maybe 5 or 6 classes a day, or in terms of the schools, and then you have a lot of coaching and coach education and stuff like that. So it can get tiring. So I wanted to try and expand my knowledge if I could. I felt that I had a really good practical coaching experience and a practical application to my coaching, but to maybe back that up with the theory as well. But I was really apprehensive. Like I'd no real college experience beforehand, and certainly anything that I would have been 10 or 12 years previous. So when I went back, I went for the Masters in Coaching in UCD, the Coaching and Exercise Science, as it was called then. I think it's just Science of Coaching now. But I was really, really lucky, because when I reached out, the module coordinator at the time, Dr. Brendan Egan, he gave me an awful lot of help and guidance. I suppose he just said, look, when you're applying, that these are the things we look out for, but don't be stressed out about the lack of academic experience, because we have a system called Recognised Prior Learning, where you can potentially come through that way as well. So that's the route I went. Got in, was lucky enough to get in, and I absolutely loved it. I just loved it, because what I found was, in one sense, it was an affirmation, because I knew all the practical coaching stuff, and now I was getting the theory as in, oh, I did that already. Actually, I just didn't know that's what it was called. Does that make sense? So I found that, like, I gained a lot of confidence from it, thinking, yeah, actually, I'm doing all right here. I just didn't realize that's what it was called, or I didn't realize that was the framework I was using. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And just slightly looking at that from a different viewpoint, now that you're kind of gone more down the academic route, still obviously involving coaching, but if someone had come from a largely academic or theory based route into a coaching masters like that, do you think it would have been as much benefit, or would they really have had to focus more of their free time on getting hands-on experience?
Yeah, no, I'm very lucky in the way it worked out for me, and that I had that practical experience to reflect on. So, like, with the greatest intention in the world, you can go straight in without having any experience, and you will learn the science, absolutely. But if you can't relate it or you can't practice it, and the biggest thing for me was being able to learn how to reflect on my actions. So, like, I remember one part of one of the lectures, guy by the name of Dr. Seamus Kelly, he did the science of coaching, right? And he's brilliant. You had 3-hour lectures, but they fly by. He'd be telling stories, and he's interviewed some of the top coaches around the world. And he made us do a task of thinking about a training session or coaching session. I can't remember the exact context, but then we had to reflect on it and what we do better. And even just that simple thing, it was like a trigger in my head. And even though I preach this in coach education, as in plan, review, and do review, and blah, 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 and all this type of things, it just clicked in my head as in, Jesus, this is not just something you do once. This is all the time. This is constant. This is this constant spiral, and this is how you get better. You do something, review it, reflect, do it again, a little bit better, and you get this sort of this stairway effect, and it just clicked. And I think from that, I don't know if I would have got that same benefit if I had no coaching experience going into it, if that makes sense, because I wouldn't have been able to put context on what I was learning. So I think, and I'm not taking away, like, I wish I had done more in college when I was younger, if that makes sense. But at the same time, I think practical experience, all the theory in the world, means nothing when you're thrown into a class full of 37-year-olds, and some of them want to play football, some of them want to play hurling, some of them don't want to do anything, and you have 2 lads kicking lumps out of each other down the back. So that goes out the window, coaching frameworks and theories, when you're in a practical situation.
What were some of the other modules you looked at in that master's?
Yeah, so the 6 modules. Let me see: science of coaching, performance analysis and how that reflects on your coaching, strength and conditioning, skill acquisition, sports psychology, and sports nutrition and physiology. So it was brilliant, because it gave me I suppose a bird's eye look of all these different performance metrics and how they could feed into my own coaching. And while you might be thinking, oh, sure, what the hell would that? How would that relate to coaching 4 and 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds and stuff like that? It doesn't directly, but it gives you a better picture of what you're aiming to get them to be. So if you're aiming to get these kids to be the best athletes as possible, well, now I know what they should be doing let's say, here's what they should be doing at an elite level, right at the top. These are the type of things we want to be able to do. So now I can start working backwards from that. They're not all going to be elite. You'd be lucky if 1% of them will be elite. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't stop you from trying to make them as best you possibly can, you know?
Now, those modules, it's a really good broad range of what's involved in coaching. And even though, like, you were relating it back to 5, 6, 7-year-olds, like, you may not be with that age group forever. And any coach going into it, you're not going to be with the same age group, the same cohort, maybe not even the same sport for the full, I suppose, career of your coaching. Plus, you'll often find as well that those who go in with the aim of working at the top level, to try and adapt from the top level to anywhere else can actually be really, really hard. Whereas if you're starting from a much lower level, it's much, much easier to build up towards and give something to the top level when you've come from somewhere else, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, I think so. And I think some people really struggle with that. I see it all the time in let's say, people who played at a really high level gone back in to coach their kids or their kids' teams. And because they're so used to that high level, one, they need to be nearly re-educated into what's required at the younger level. But 2, there might be a sense of frustration that, well, why can't they do this? Do you know what I mean? Why can't they do what I could do, if that makes sense? And I think that's why coach education is so important. And it's great to see, like, so when I did that master's, that was 2014 or 15, I think. When I did that, there was only that master's had only just started, and I think there was one other master's in UL at the time, coaching sports performance. But now there's other things, different things popping up all around the country and beyond. Like in DCU, for example, Anya McNamara came in last year, and now there's a prof doc in elite performance, and then there's a master's in elite performance starting up in September. But elite performance is not just, let's say, the the Olympic athletes. Like, elite performance is being as good as you possibly can be, coaching or in whatever you're doing with whatever group you're working with. So for me, that could be as good as I possibly could be with the nursery in my own club. Does that make sense? So like, it's great to see so many of these things starting up, and I suppose for me, coaches are hugely undervalued in Ireland. Like, and I don't mean in a professional sense as in people getting paid. I just mean in general, they're taken for granted. But I think people, hopefully, if one good thing comes of COVID, that people will put a value on coaches, all those volunteer coaches around the country who provide such an outlet to kids, to being active, to being healthy, to socialising with other kids. And I hope anyway that more value will be put on the coach. You know?
And Stephen, in your experience with the few clubs that you've been in, obviously, especially amongst GAA circles, you know, it's all volunteerism. It's people in the club, parents, that kind of thing. Have you seen much of an uptake just around parent groups, people who, you know, offer up their time in getting themselves into maybe more coaching courses that possibly aren't provided, you know, through the clubs, just through their own interest, through, I suppose, maybe an interest that might have been spiked just from giving a hand or across the weekend or something like that? Have you seen any increase in that?
Yes, I think it's hard at the moment because it's like really hard to do a coaching course online. You know, like it's really difficult. The GAA are I suppose, and our GPO is doing it, and they're doing their best, but it's hard. Like, whatever chance you have of convincing someone to turn up on a Saturday morning to come down and we'll do a bit of coach ed or whatever, it's harder then to get them to log on, or even if they do log on and the screen is off and you just don't know if they're engaging, you know. But what I do think is like, with the advent of these new, like, that's more formal education, but there's lots more webinars and people are open now to exposing themselves to that, and there's podcasts and there's so many different resources out there now that I suppose the key for us, let's say taking Nafina for example, the key for us now is trying to keep the right message going out. Okay, so people might listen to a podcast with I don't know, someone like Stuart Lancaster, and he's talking about how they do, and Stuart is brilliant, like talking maybe about an elite performance setting in terms of Leinster rugby or in previous life with English rugby. But that's not necessarily what we want the nursery coaches listening to, if that makes sense. So it's just, I suppose, there's so much out there now, which just keeping people, guiding them into I suppose, coach education, where we feel is the most value for what the point that they're at in their coaching journey at the moment.
And as a tutor, I'd be inclined to say as well that doing particularly a foundation online, I think you'd lose so much of the potential value from doing it online, because like when you're there tutoring and you split them up into different groups, go away and put something together for this scale. I love when they're with someone from another club and like they're in a group for 10 minutes. If they spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about the skill and the activity, it's the other chats around like the difficulties we have with getting some of our under 10s up to the field. I can't keep their concentration, and someone else has had that but has solved it, and that sharing in those little groups is so important, and you lose out on an awful lot of that for an online course.
100%. And just the fact of being in the room together or on the pitch together and getting to see a practical example of something, right? And it's not about, you don't go and so people turn up to coach education expecting to go away with a load of drills, right? A load of drills and a load of games. And yes, they will get drills and games, but they're available. That's the easy bit. The other bits are the how to coach bits, like the relationships, the communication, the how to give feedback, the pats on the backs when needed, or the kick up the arse when needed, and the small things it's impossible to get across online without getting that practical example. That's the thing we're really missing out on, I feel. And like, it's very, very easy to give a coach ed sort of a session in terms of technical and tactical online, but the real, like, they call them the soft skills, whereas they're probably the most important skills, like how to actually communicate with people and kids, and how that changes as they get older, etc. How that might differ from a boy to a girl. All these things are massively important, and that's really, really difficult to get across online. Like, I could give a webinar about it, or you could, John, but how much of that information is actually taken across? And it goes back to my earlier point. If you don't have context, if you can't put it into context, it's really difficult. I love Anya McNamara is in DCU, and I know I mentioned her already, but her quote of "it depends" is brilliant, because she's dead right. There's no one right answer in a coaching context. It always depends. You know, it depends on the age. It depends the level they're at. It depends how many coaches you have. It depends on the level the coaches are at. You know, so like it's sometimes I think people feel like it's a cop-out answer, but it's not. It's really, really relevant. I could stand up and say, no, this is the answer. This is how you should do it, and this is how you should do your fundamental movement sessions with your kids. And people will say, oh, well, Stephen studied all that. He must know that. But at the same time, it does depend.
It's great to hear. It's great to hear you say that. I even this week alone, I've been to nutrition talks that I've been giving, and you get these very direct questions, and you come back with, well, it depends, and you can just see people go, this fella. But it's trying to get that information across to people, and the context is so important. That's great to hear.
And towards the end of your masters, then obviously you have to go do a research project, and that kind of set you up for not just one little MSc thesis, an awful lot more, which has probably formed a huge part of your life the last few years. What was that? Yeah,
so I suppose just to take a step back again. So I was obviously doing loads of classes in schools, and I was in really, really good schools. Like, they were brilliant schools, and they're brilliant teachers, and on the whole a really active, like, healthy cohort. But yet there was still some kids that no matter what I did or what I tried, they had zero interest in taking part in the GAA style games that I'd be doing, right? And I could understand that, right? They just don't like GAA games, that's fine. So they don't like camogie, they don't like hurling, they don't like football, grand. But then you'd be chatting to a teacher, or you'd see that they'd have no interest in any activity. And these kids are only 9, 10, 11, and I just couldn't get my head around this. I'm like this is mad. When I was a kid, I was outside all the time, literally playing every sport I could. And the curfew for me was street lights come on, it's time to go home, you know? And it's gas. We were very, in one sense, like, we were lucky. We lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, and there was this patch of square tarmac outside the house, and still there. But like, there was a telegraph pole and a tree on one side of the square, and on the other side there was a tree and a bin, and that was our two goals. And this was a pitch, and our neighbours, who were still like lifelong friends with, were still there. Every day we'd be out, we'd be hurling, we'd be footballing, we would be everything on this little square of tarmac. And sorry, I'm digressing here, but that was our training pitch when we were kids, you know. It was a disaster though. The tree and the bin was a little bit wider than the other one, and there'd be all sorts of rows over goals going in. But so that's what started me off. So I started looking at the research and what sort of stuff drives this motivation to be involved in activity and stuff like that. So I came across fundamental movement skills, and I said, oh, this looks interesting to me. So basically, fundamental movement skills are the basic building blocks to being active, right? So the idea being is, if you picture a pyramid, and across the bottom of that pyramid you have a load of simple skills: running, jumping, hopping, skipping, throwing, catching, kicking, etc., right? Real simple skills, and these are your foundation. And think of these as your foundation, that if you nail all these skills, if you have a good range or a good level of mastery of these skills, that you'll be able to do, you could be able to have a go at any activity you want. Okay, so for example, you're asking an 8-year-old to play a game of Gaelic football. Great. In what's involved in that? There's running, there's bouncing, there's catching, there's kicking, and then there's loads of evasion, there's dodging, there's changing direction, and then there's actual contact as well. So you can't just ask a kid to do that with no basic skill level of anything else in the first place. Okay, and if we do, we're putting them at a serious disadvantage, right? So imagine having that kid having a good base in all those skills. That kid's able to link those skills together, and that kid's able to actually progress. So that's what I started looking at, because the research, Australia were miles ahead at the time, and they looked at kids' proficiency levels in these basic movement skills, and they tracked them over time. And the kids with the higher levels of the higher proficiency levels of these basic skills were more active as teenagers. So that's what I decided to look at. And I suppose I'll come back to the fundamental movement skills in a minute. But I looked at classes. So I did 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, 4 days a week. And I did that with a boys class and a girls class. And I assessed pre and post, and I did a control group as well. So I did nothing with them. And we went back and tested 6 weeks apart. the difference was unreal. Like their basic skill level went through the roof. I think it was 24%. I can't remember. My supervisor would be screaming at this if he ever listens to it, that I'm probably totally misquoting it. But I just couldn't get over it. But for me, the biggest thing wasn't what was part of my thesis, right? The thesis was just literally objectively looking at the skills. The biggest thing for me was the feedback from the teachers, right? This didn't go into the thesis, but they would say, oh yeah, it was unreal. As soon as we did that first thing in the morning, and then I went in and straight away I did maths, or straight away I did Irish, whatever the tricky subject was, because it was like they got the giddiness out of them and they were tuned in. So this sort of feedback to me, I was like, there has to be something more in this. Like this is mad. And that's, I suppose, where Moving Well, Being Well, the idea for it was born, in terms of looking at this bigger and better. So went off and looked for the expertise within Ireland, and it happened to be in DCU, Johan Ustertel, Sarah Jane Belton. So Johan is who I made first contact with. Noel McCaffrey gave me the introduction. And yeah, it's gone from there. Met with Johan, we decided, there's something in this. Met with Noel O'Connor, who's part of the Insight SFI Research Centre for Data Analytics. I know that's a mouthful, but so met up, and I suppose it grew from there. So then we had this idea, and we approached Dublin GAA and the GAA and said, listen, have this idea, doing something big and mad, and would you be interested? And eventually everyone got around the table and said, yeah, let's just do it. And I suppose the Moving Well, Being Well project is multifaceted in terms of we went out and we did a massive nationwide data collection. And John, maybe I'm skipping too far ahead here, but we made a massive big data collection across the country. So over 2,000 kids, but we looked at their fundamental movement skills. We looked at their perception of how they perform these basic skills. So ask a 5-year-old, are you good at running? Are you good at jumping? Yeah, I'm deadly, right? Yeah, I'm deadly. I'm really cool. I'll beat you in a race, no problem. And you can picture it. I guarantee you, everyone listening will be like, yeah, 100%. Ask a 10-year-old, how good are you at running? And immediately what happens? They relate themselves to their friends. They relate themselves to the people maybe that they play sport with or don't play sport with, okay? So this is why that's important, and I'll come back to it later. We looked at their fitness levels. We did VO2 max. We calculated VO2 max from doing beep tests. We did muscle strength. We did body composition. If anyone listening, we did not do beep tests with 5 and 6 year olds. Don't worry, we're not monsters. We just did it with the older sort of cohort. But then crucially, we looked at the psychological side of things as well. We looked at their self-confidence, their body image, their well-being, their motivation, all these different things, and questionnaires for teachers and parents. And what we wanted to do was to get a snapshot of where Ireland where it was at. Because what we realised from looking at the research, that it's not just fundamental movement skills. They're not just the key driver. So the key driver, we think, for people being active, and all the research around the world is pointing towards this, is physical literacy. Okay? And you probably hear this being bandied around the whole time, and people often mistake physical literacy for just fundamental movement skills, but it's more than that. So it's physical competence, driving confidence, driving motivation, which drives physical competence. So let me explain that a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm rambling here, so jump in if needs be. John, if you're able to kick the ball, right? Imagine you're 6 or 7 years of age. If you're able to kick the ball, kids aren't stupid. They know if they can do something or not. You know you can kick that ball, right? That means you're confident to kick that ball, but crucially, you're confident to do it in front of your friends or in front of your family, right? Two key stakeholders, which means then you'll be motivated to take part in activities that require kicking that ball. With me so far? And then from that then, if you're more motivated to do it, you're going to take part in more activities that give you opportunity to kick the ball, which means you're going to get better at kicking the ball because you do it more often, okay? So you have this cycle. So we kick, we get more confident, we then are more motivated to do it, which means we get better again, right? So think about that for all these fundamental movement skills. Think of that bottom of our pyramid that I talked about earlier on, and imagine if we have that sort of cycle going, and we call it a positive spiral of engagement, right? So we have all these skills, we get good at their basic components, we get confident in it, we're motivated to do it, which means we get better at all these skills. So we have this positive spiral all the way going up. Okay? And why that's important is that means if you're asked to do an activity, so back to that example I used earlier on, if you're asked to go out and play Gaelic football, yeah, I'll give it a go, no problem, because I know I can kick, I know I can catch, I know I can run. Oh yeah, I'll try and link them together, no problem at all. If I'm asked to go and play a game of basketball, yeah, I know I can run, I know I can catch, I know I can throw. Same for any sport. Or if I'm asked to do dance and PE or to do gymnastics, yeah, I'll give that a go. I know I've got good balance. I know I can hop. I know I can jump. Do you know, that sort of way? So you're setting these kids up for us. We're trying to look at setting the kids up to be active for life and giving them the tools to be active for life. Because, and I'll stop talking in a second, I promise. Because on the other side of that, you've got what's called a negative spiral of disengagement. So let's say all of us are in a class together, right? So John, Shane, Damien, you guys are all from sporty backgrounds and you love sport, right? Love it. You play everything you can get your hands on. Teacher throws in a ball for a game of football. Could be in PE, could be in yard, could be whatever. I'm not from a sporty background, let's say. My parents aren't that into sport. They don't bring me to sport, or for whatever reason, I just haven't done it. We're playing a match. You lads are loving life. You're passing to each other, and Damien is driving through the middle there, and he passes to John, and he goes round one or two people, and he passes the ball to me. Now, John passing the ball to me that's a matter for debate another day, right? But he passes the ball to me, and the ball hits my foot, bounce off it. The other team get the ball and score a goal. So what's going to happen there? Do we think?
We're going to stop passing to you.
Exactly, 100%, right? So the kids are going to. So John will stop passing to me. Other kids are going to notice I'm not as good as John, or I'm not as good as Damien, right? Other kids are going to notice that. So it's not just you that mightn't pass it to me, John. It's everyone that mightn't pass it to me. But crucially, I'm going to notice that I'm not as good as you, or I'm not as good as Damien or Shane. Okay, so if that happens once or twice, it's no big deal. Kids are tough, they're resilient, right? But imagine that happens all the time. Imagine that happens every week. All of a sudden, I don't like football. Okay? 6 months, 2 years down the line, I don't really like PE. 10 years down the line, I don't like physical activity. All right? So this is where the importance of the fundamental movement skills comes in, and how we actually teach them, how we progress them, and how we develop them. Because if we do that in the right way and with the right manner, we can get that positive spiral of engagement going rather than the negative one.
Gives a really, really good overview. There's a few different directions we can bring it in from here now, but to give one kind of analogy, that just because I'm seeing it in the older age group, 13 to 19 and all like that, and to liken it to something else in the same school setting is like, because I'm biased obviously because from a hurling background, but I see that as like the ultimate level of skill. And to compare that to another subject, I would see playing hurling at a really high level using a full range of skills is like analysing sonnets written by Shakespeare. It's at a really high level of English. And some people look at hurling as the same. So when you start off with your 5 or 6 or 7 year olds, we need to have them at the top level. We'll start them off with a bit of hand pass and striking off the left, all like that. But those who go on and study English at a really high level, or even for Leaving Cert, they're still starting at 5 or 6, learning their ABCs, then starting to put together a few really simple words, then a few sentences, then a few paragraphs, and eventually go on from that. And it's the exact same for an awful lot of skills. The key is that the fundamental skills, the ones you start off with, whether you go the Shakespeare route, whether you go be a brilliant sociological researcher, whatever like that, it's still the ABCs to get you there. And same then for the fundamental movement skills. You need to know those to open up all the opportunities that then come on top of that, regardless of what ultimate physical activity you finish up in or excel in or just use to guide health for life.
Exactly that, yeah. I use the book analogy a lot. Like, you don't teach kids to read by giving them the book. Exactly like you said, John. They teach the alphabet, sounds of letters, words, sentences. Eventually they can read the book, Another one, like parents are oftentimes when I would do a talk, or people would approach me and ask me, I'm really worried about my kids' fundamental movement, skill development, etc., etc. And I'm like, well, first thing first, brilliant that you're conscious and aware of what they are. But I said, you're the best teacher they can have at a very young age. I said, how did they learn to walk? So the kid picks themselves up, they pull themselves up on a couch or a table or whatever it is, and they'll stand first. And then you might hold the kids 2 hands and help them take a few steps across the room. And then it's 1 hand, and then it's no hands, and they take a few steps until eventually they're walking on their own. So it's the same principle. We just want to put a safe environment where kids can develop these skills in a like as best they possibly can, a wide range of them, and that you're providing. So to use the coaching analogy, or to fall back on the coaching research, you're providing the scaffolding to help them get there. Okay, so it's one step at a time. Okay, if they fail, it's okay. They only fall a little bit. Whereas if you try and give them to the Shakespeare sonnet analogy, if you try and give them that straight away, write one of them when they can't even read properly, like it's crazy. And when you think about it, when you break it down like this, and when you go through it with people, they go, oh yeah. And a lot of people have that aha moment. But there's still a lot of work to be done in getting that message out there, and realizing that this broad skill base, or this broad this foundation, and this cycle of physical literacy, it's not just I can relate it back there as I'm speaking to you to the reflective piece. It's constantly evolving, and it's a constant journey, and it's all the time. If you give them the good foundation, the other stuff will come. And as you say, they'll end up taking part in whatever activity they want to take part in. That's the key. And you just provide them the tools to do that.
There's actually a really good graphic. I've seen it a few times, and even I know Sarah Jane and Johan, your supervisors, they developed the YPAT course, and I'm a tutor for that. And we were on the training day for it, one of the lads shared it around. And it's just, if you can't, and it's an American one, so a runner, a swimmer, and a thrower, and it has all this list of activities you can never get into because you can't run. So you can't play baseball because you have to run from base to base. You can't play soccer because you have to run after the ball. Same for swim. Then if you can't swim, you can never be a swimmer, obvious enough. Never do a triathlon, never be a lifeguard. Can't really enjoy yourself at the pool even, like when you go there. So having all that there as a baseline. When you did that snapshot study, or cross-sectional research, give it its fancy name, what did you discover? What actually are the fundamental movement skills like in Ireland at the minute?
Not great. So we released them. It's gas. We released them last year, and for whatever reason, I think it was just in the middle of the election cycle, and people were sick of hearing about politics. But the media picked up on it massively, right? And they've really focused on the bad news parts of it, you know. But so first of all, we found that skills aren't great. So the one that everyone fixates on is the 75% have achieved running mastery. So this is kids from 5 to 12 years of age, right? Over 2,000 of them. 75% have mastered or nearly mastered the run. And now people might be saying, well, how do you know if they've run properly or not? So it's standardized. These tests have been used millions of times in research all over the world, and it's really simple. There's like 4 components. Like one of the components that kids commonly fail on is opposite arm to opposite leg. So you picture Usain Bolt in a snapshot, if that makes sense, when you see him running, and there you have you'll see that right arm will be up and the left knee will be up. Do you know, that sort of way? So that's one really common one. And people say 75%, that's not a bad score. But when you look at it the opposite way, that means 25% of kids can't run properly. So, John, exactly what you said, like how the hell do you expect them to take part in activities that run? But more importantly, how do they feel about themselves running? And how many people preclude themselves from activities that involve running because they don't feel like they're as good as their friends? Does that make sense? Like, we also found like gender imbalances in terms of the girls smash the lads in terms of their proficiency in the locomotor skills. So that's moving your body. So running, hopping, skipping, jumping, balance. Okay. So the girls were way better than the boys in that up until the age of 10. Okay. The boys, on the other hand, were way better than the girls at all age groups in the object control skills. So that's your kicking, catching, throwing, right? All those type of skills.
Do you think that's because they're kind of more socialized towards those type of sports, or is it more of a natural male versus female thing, and that's why they eventually go that route?
So
or can you tell even?
We don't know, so I can't say. So exactly that. So we could guess that stereotypically, maybe more girls are put into gymnastics and dancing and stuff like that. But at the same time, there's an awful lot, like the huge uptake in girls, let's say, taking part in Gaelic football and stuff like that. So I don't know. I don't know is the answer. Stereotypically, Certainly when I was growing up, more boys would go towards the object control sports and girls towards the locomotor and balance, etc. Right? But we don't know. But what is really interesting is that this now gives us information that we can act on, right? So it's not a case of, oh God, the girls are brutal at object control skills. The boys are brutal as well. They're just better than the girls, if that makes sense. None of them have achieved mastery or where they should be. So all the research would say we should be able to master these skills by around about 8 years of age, right? But remember what I said earlier on, that the research shows that kids are more active when they master these skills early. They're more active in their teenage years, right? So now all of a sudden we now can think, okay, well, here's something we can act on. So we now know if we focus on these object control skills with girls at an early age and make sure we don't forget about them, make sure that we put a focus on developing them, as well as the other stuff as well, the locomotor, obviously. But that can have an actual tangible impact. That can actually have kids more active in their teenage years, you know? And I suppose that's the big thing for us. Like, everyone focused on the bad news part of it last year, but the good news is we know we can impact this stuff. You know, we know that if we do impact, that we can have a big impact. We can increase activity in the teenage years. And like, one other thing, which was, I suppose, this is the most worrying thing for me that we found, that skill levels plateaued at around 10 years of age, right? And just for anyone listening, that means that we had skill improvements from junior infants to senior infants, from senior infants to first class, and there are significant improvements. So that just means that they're important in terms of a scientific context, right? So these are flags for showing us that pay attention to these results. But we had significant findings for every class all the way up to 10 years of age. And then from 10 to 11, nothing. 11 to 12, nothing. Actually, 11 to 12 was a slight decrease. It just wasn't significant. So what's that telling us? We haven't achieved mastery in these skills, and then we stop progressing. So what's that telling us? Well, firstly, we can't say for definite. We can only guess, right? But our kids now, at that age, they're becoming more self-conscious, right? They're becoming more aware of their friends and their social standing and their social status. So our kids now shying away from these activities because they know they're not as good as their mates. They know they're not as good as their friends. So these are more questions that we have. Like, we've obviously, when you do research, you end up with more questions than answers. But again, it's now, okay, we have a baseline now, right? There's loads of great research going on in Ireland in terms of fundamental movement skills, like stuff going on in DCU. You mentioned Sarah Jane Johan in the adolescent sphere, but Bronagh McGrain in Pat's DCU, Wesley O'Brien down in Cork, Lisa Kelly in Athlone. There's loads. I'm forgetting. I'm going to get shot for leaving people out. But there's loads of great stuff now. So we now have loads of information. We have a fair idea of where we're at or where we have been at over the last number of years. So it'd be great now to see, let's put a focus on this. We can intervene here. We can make a difference. And let's go back and see if we are making a difference. And I suppose that's where we're trying to get to with Moving Well, Being Well. We've piloted our intervention 2 or 3 sort of times, and we've had really good impact, you know.
And I suppose, Stephen, I'm just wondering, on, say, a global scale, you know, since a lot of these models that you would have used for your research have been tested all around the globe, on a global scale, where do we kind of sit with those skill masteries? Are we really far down the pecking order? And if so, are we looking to adopt model approaches from other countries, or are we just kind of trying to create our own approach?
So globally, we're down. It's not just an Irish thing that we're low in low mastery levels of fundamental movement skills. Globally, it's pretty much everywhere. I'm not going to say we're way worse or way better than anyone else. We're behind some countries, but we're ahead of other. Like, it's not, and I don't even think it matters that much. I just think that knowing we're low is important. Okay, and our target shouldn't be, for me, let's get up as best. So the Canadians, the Australians, New Zealanders, they're miles ahead of us and all this sort of stuff, right? They're way ahead, and in terms of the research and in terms of what they're trying to do, but I think what's important for us is we shouldn't be trying to catch them. We should be just trying to get to mastery level, if that makes sense, right? And I'm using as fundamental movement skills, let's say, as one part of it, right? We should be just trying to drive that to mastery level as early as we possibly can. And then at least we know that the kids have the basic tools, right? And then there's other things, like other people would argue then we should be adding cycling and swimming and stuff like that. And like, look, the more activity, the better, in my opinion, right? But I think what's important is that we look to promote these in the right way. So I'd hate for people to turn around and say, right, we have to drill this stuff now, and kids in a line and drilling, skipping and hopping and jumping, and great that we drive it in and they can do it, but we do it in the wrong way. So we don't increase the confidence and motivation to take part in activity in general. We just drill them in the physical movement of it, right? Which would work to increase those scores. But long term, I don't think it'll have that big impact, because they're not doing it by choice. They're not doing it by that, you know, that they don't have that sort of intrinsic drive to do it. And when you look at the research coming out now about the what do you call it, the Daily Mile in schools, you're getting conflicting evidence now. Okay, so you're getting some kids some schools that are saying it's fantastic, and don't get me wrong, like in terms of moderate to vigorous activity, running a mile or walking a mile, fantastic, right? But now you're getting conflicting evidence coming out now in the UK, some really good research coming out questioning, well, hang on, this is great for the active kids, but are we turning other kids off running because it's forced upon them, right? I don't know the answer yet, but I think it's really interesting because it fits in with the whole physical literacy thing in terms of that holistic model of developing them in the right way, that they want to actually be active, and providing them with the tools to be active for life, you know?
That's actually really interesting on what I've been digging into lately in my own research, and that I've done a few pilot focus groups with a view to doing larger ones. But the big thing coming out on how physical activity leads to greater enhanced well-being is through volition, or doing stuff of your own choice, of your own motivation. And the controlled motivation, or people forcing you to do stuff, doesn't just stop well-being, but does actively decrease it. So forcing people to do stuff they don't want to do, or they don't have the necessary skills to do at the required level, has quite a negative impact on their well-being overall.
Yeah, 100%. And a colleague of mine, Cameron Pears, so Cam would have done the PhD. We would have worked alongside each other, and I would have sort of been, my focus would have been on the fundamentals, the skills and the physical elements, whereas Cam would have focused on the confidence, self-efficacy and motivation and stuff like that. And it's mad, like, because I slag Cam all the time, like, you know, with your psychology and it's wishy-washy science and slagging and stuff like that. But to be honest, like that's where it's at. Like if we can convince the kids that they're great, if you imagine bottling the 5-year-olds' enthusiasm and being able to give it to the 10 and 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds, like, that's the dream. Like, if you can get them wanting to be active and wanting to go out and play and stuff like that, like that's the magic pill that solves so many of our health issues, so many of our well-being issues, so many of our mental health issues, you know. Like it really is. Like, we released a study, and John, I know we were chatting briefly on it, like we released a study there a couple of weeks ago that showed that basically kids, the better their fundamental movement skills, the better their health-related fitness indicators. So basically, that's just really simple. That's just we measured cardiovascular endurance, body composition, muscle strength, muscle endurance, flexibility, and these are all independently related to beneficial, positive health benefits. Okay, so decreased risk of cardiovascular disease, decreased risk of obesity, decreased risk or increased bone health, and the decreased risk of mental health issues and stuff like that, right? So what not only did we show that higher FMS equals higher HRF, but we also showed that we measured it over time, right? So I'm not going to say that it's not a, so there's this big thing in research where it's causation and versus causality, etc. So I'm not going to say that it's a definitive answer, but it's pointing us now in a direction. It's giving us a signpost to go look into deeper. But we found that the relationship gets stronger as they got older, right? So for anyone listening, that means, right? So think about it that, for example, the higher FMS, the lower the waist circumference was one of the findings, right? So that's what we call an inverse relationship. But that relationship got stronger as we got older, right? So that was a stronger relationship in a 12-year-old than it was in the 8-year-old. So that means that it's a better body composition score as they got older. So just think about the health ramifications that has then. And again, the paper wasn't about saying you have to do this to have better health outcomes. The paper was showing, well, look, we talk a lot about fundamental movement skills. Well, here's a potentially tangible output later in life. Here's a potentially tangible thing that could have like really, really tangible outcomes for somebody's health. Okay. And I think that's where we need to get to a point. And to be fair, like Sport Ireland have a 10-year plan now for the first time ever, I think it is. But physical literacy is littered throughout it. Okay, so it's talked about in a sporting context. It's talked about in a school context, in a parental context, in a community context, which is fantastic. And I just want people. I hope people, anyone listening, that you just realise the concept can be explained very complicated, and hopefully I didn't ramble on too much and I've explained it relatively simply. And look, it is complicated. It's not as simple as how I explained it. There's loads of different things, and some people are probably screaming at me, but I sometimes think that we try and overcomplicate science. Like it should be, we need to give people okay, here's what we did. Trust us. Here's for the scientists, go and look and make sure and critique and make sure we did what we did in the right way. But here's what we found out, right? And here's some actions you can take from it. Because I think too often we do science and we stick it on a shelf. Look at how great I am to other scientists, but where's the output to that, you know? So for me, I think communicating that is important too.
And we'll just go on to a really good output you've had recently, but just to think of the link between the fundamental movement skills and the health-related fitness kind of on a practical level. That if you think of an 8-year-old who goes on to be a 12-year-old who has a much better range of fundamental movement skills, and you have all of the various opportunities available to you, like hurling, football, soccer, rugby, whatever it is you want to go and do, you can go and do it. So you're going to take part in just way more stuff, and by taking part in way more stuff, your fitness is going to go up because you're more active in general. Your waist circumference goes down because you're more active in general. But also bear in mind that if you're good at a lot of that stuff, there's a good chance you're probably doing bits of it at home with parents who value fundamental movement skills, but also value being active, being healthy. You're probably in a friend group who values all that, maybe like unbeknownst to themselves as 12-year-olds, but they all get better at the fundamental movement skills together and has that big knock-on effect. And instead of that being something that happens in bubbles around the place, if we can grow those bubbles and have knock-on influences to the wider population, like really, I think the knock-on health benefits of improving fundamental movement skills, not for specifically what they are, but the long-term knock-on effects would have such benefits to the wider community health-wise. Yeah, and then think about that, right? So you mentioned it as a fundamental movement skills context there, John, but think about that, like push that forward 10, 15 years and they're teenagers. And imagine having these, as you said, these bubbles. Imagine having these big bubbles still involved in physical activity, still involved in sport. Like, you're solving so many problems. You like it's everything. And then imagine then being able to expand that into areas where socioeconomic status comes into play, or like social issues, we'll say, come into play. And imagine giving kids an outlet, or giving kids the tools early that they feel that they can avail of these outlets, and to potentially keep them on a better track, or a you know what I mean? I don't like potentially keep kids out of trouble, like being really simple. And I know it might be oversimplifying things, and I know opportunity and environment, etc., comes into play, but I do think that there's an opportunity to intervene early and to really, really give kids this really good grounding for life, and all the good stuff that comes with it through sport, through being active, through your friend circles, through the relationships with parents, with teachers, etc. You know, because you can see like the impact the midnight leagues and stuff had in Chicago over there for improving social issues and everything that way.
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of one of the big factors I would think would make a big difference when it comes to FMS would be family size, or like amount of siblings. Was there much of a correlation between, I suppose, the positive scores, and then it comes to people who maybe had 2 or 3 brothers? Because you know yourself, like, I don't know if you have any brothers, but literally we spent the entire of our childhood just driving our mom mad, running around the house, throwing stuff for no reason. Like, just all that stuff, I assume that must have come in very handy then when you went across and you were going to measure those fundamental skills?
That's actually a really good point. It's not something we measured. I'm trying to think, did we ask it in the questionnaire? Because if we did, I'm going back. There might be a paper in it, so you might get a co-authorship out of that, Shane. We'll have to see.
Been a good afternoon.
But no, yeah, it's a really good point. And yeah, think about, like, I've one brother. I'm the eldest, so he would say the same. He would say I knocked him around the place, but he would also say that he learned a lot of like should you be out playing on the street? I mentioned the tarmac out in front of us earlier. Like, so there'd be 4 of us that would have played, like, would have been thick as thieves growing up, and there would have been one older than me, one of the neighbours, and then he'd have a younger brother who was maybe a year younger than me, and then my brother on then would be another year or 2 younger than him. So we had maybe a 5-year spell or gap. But we were all playing to hurling, football, soccer, whatever was the if Wimbledon was on, we'd be out playing tennis. If Mighty Ducks came out, we all got rollerblades and we were playing street hockey, that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, 100%. And there's a great picture. Niall Moyney uses it in presentations, and it's a picture of a load of kids playing on a road, and there's jackets down as goalposts, but you can see the difference in age range is maybe 4 or 5 to 12 or 13, boys and girls playing. And then he compares it to a picture of a parent dragging a kid back into the house, manky dirty. And then the next picture is the parent dragging the kid out of the house. And then when they're out of the house, the kids are just on a phone or they're on a screen, you know. So, like, it's a different time, and that's why I think this sort of stuff is so important. Like, I know I keep harping on about it, but the earlier we can intervene with this sort of stuff, I think the better, you know.
And in terms of intervening, I know the Moving Well, Being Well project has recently brought out the movement breaks and stuff like that. You know, just give us a little lowdown on that, and maybe where the next steps. I know Nathan has kind of followed on from your PhD with more stuff. Where are we going next? What are the next steps for everyone?
Yeah, so we have stuff under review, like papers and stuff like that around the intervention. But as you know yourself, John, these things take time. We had a 3-pronged approach. So I'll come back. So I'll come back to the main one in a second. But we had movement breaks for the classroom. So very simple. We had them done as a PowerPoint, sort of a resource for the teachers to guide their class through. So something as simple as push your chair in behind your desk. Hold on to your chair. Can you stand on one leg? Can you stand with no hands on the chair? Can you do it on the other leg? Can you do it closing your eyes? Real simple, and then advancing on to more sort of advanced stuff, right? We had a home activity, that was the idea of this, was that to get the kids active at home, okay? Because one of the things that came back to us in terms of the research was that parents put down time as the biggest barrier to being active with their kids. Time. So our hope was that this home activity was a 7 or 8 minute activity. So it could be something as simple as go home, get a pair of socks, roll them up. Can you throw them and hit the curtains or whatever? Can you do it with your other hand? How far can you throw it? How far can your dad throw it? How far can your mom throw it? Brothers. The idea was to involve everyone in the activity, and the key teaching points for the throw were sort of laid out within it. So a bit of education for the parents in terms of the actual skill, a bit of crack and a bit of fun at home, but also showing them that it doesn't have to be hours upon hours of activity. Little 10-minute breaks, brilliant, like, you know. So that was the second part of it. And then the main part, I suppose, was, so the project was in collaboration with the GAA all the way. So we had Dublin GAA and the GAA. So originally they helped us get into the primary schools throughout the country, and we piggybacked on their existing infrastructure. But this time we trained up the coaches that were going into the primary schools anyway, and they went in and delivered a 30-minute fundamental movement based class, non-sport specific, to a class. But instead of just delivering it to the kids so the kids would get to benefit, the teacher had to be on their hip. So, for example, John, you're the teacher. I go in and I'm delivering the class and I'm telling you why I'm doing what I'm doing, if that makes sense. So this is why we're doing the hop today. This is what we're looking out for. And we gave them a resource that they could keep looking at or whatever. And the idea was then, John, that you would have to repeat that class before I came back to you the following week. Okay? So the idea was that we would train up the kids, but also train up the teachers. And crucially, train up the teachers in their own environment. So there's no point in us bringing in hundreds of teachers into DCU, big, massive, phenomenally modern sports hall with all the best of equipment, huge big gym. And then a load of teachers going back and not having a hall, first of all, or having a tiny hall or a small yard or a hall that they can only use half for because the other half's being used for rehearsing Christmas plays or whatever that might be. So again, it comes back to what I said earlier on. The context is crucial. So we need to be able to allow them to be able to do these things in their own context. So that's what we would have done. And we did that for 6 weeks, and then week 7 and 8, the teachers were on their own. So we would have tested pre and post, and then we had a control group as well. And the control group means that we just tested them pre and post, but we didn't go near them. We didn't give them any resources or anything like that. So yeah, huge increase. Fundamental movement skills went through the roof on the intervention group, and they actually went down on the control group, but only like a 2% or something. So it didn't make a difference. It's not significant, as I said earlier on. So we didn't have to pay attention to it. The big thing was the confidence went up as well, right? So confidence only went up about 5%, right? But that's very significant because that's now when you're getting into behavioral change territory now, right? So I could go into the science and the effect size and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to because I'll just be boring everyone listening. But we were getting significant results in that regard, right? And increasing confidence over an 8-week period to the extent we did was good. But crucially, we went back 6 months later, right? We didn't go near them for 6 months. And crucially, the FMS continued to develop at a greater rate than the control group. And confidence continued to develop at a greater rate. So whether that was the kids were just more confident or were playing it more often, or whether it was the teachers were more confident in continuing to try and develop, we're not exactly sure. And that's stuff that you mentioned. Nathan is doing some brilliant work at looking at the efficacy and the rollout. So we're not exactly sure, but we do know we had an effect. We do know we had an impact, and we did it. It was no cost to schools. It was with minimal equipment. It was in schools, their own environment, so they don't have to get a sub in to cover while we're doing a training or anything like that. I suppose, to be fair to the GAA, they were very happy for it to go in as a non-sport specific type thing and for that sort of greater good piece, you know. So that's what we did. We've now upgraded the in-class piece to those movement breaks, John. So Una Britton is working on it at the minute. She's a postdoc in DCU, and she's after turning around 51 videos in a very short period of time. We're very lucky that there's a green screen studio in DCU that we were able to avail of through the teaching enhancement unit. And between herself and we got Maura Coulter came in and gave us some primary school PE expertise as well. And the PDSD PE actually came in on board and gave us some great expertise as well. So we were able to produce all these videos, and it's like 10 skills, 10 basic movement skills. And there's 4 or 5 videos of each. There's 3 or 4 minutes per video. And we were lucky enough to secure the services of Muntar John, who I've played from the homeschool hub, and I played junior hurling with him. I play junior hurling with now, whereas he's at a slightly higher level than that. But yeah, he came in and he was brilliant, and they're gone out, and we've got great reaction to them so far. So the idea is that they can be used in the classroom as a movement break in a safe, COVID compliant manner, but we've released them early now than we had planned, just to give teachers, parents, coaches, anyone at home that they can be done just as easily at home, you know.
And long term, say dream, best case scenario, instead of using movement breaks as a way to nearly trick the younger people into getting better at fundamental movement skills, would ideally we be looking to have developing the fundamental movement skills as a core component of the curriculum at primary level, so they're seen on a par with your ABCs, your 1, 2, 3s, everything that way? Will we ever get to that stage, and have we seen that kind of, is it like that in Australia and Canada, or is it still a bit more not fully embedded?
Like, I think schools get a raw deal. Primary school teachers have to teach 11 or 12 curriculum subjects. They have 9 to half 2 or 9 to half 1 if you're an infants teacher, and probably 40 minutes of that as a break. And then they have to eat lunch, and teachers, like, it can't be the teacher's responsibility to do everything. Don't get me wrong, right? I'm biased. I would have 5 hours of PE a week mandatory if I could, and I know that the curriculum is under review, but I think the teachers get a raw deal. It has to be coming from all angles. It has to. I agree. We should definitely do more in schools, and we should have it more. Like fundamental movement skills is in the curriculum, but I think it should be more explicit. I think it should be more junior and senior infants. This is what you do. You don't worry about. So, like fundamental movement skills will touch all of the strands of PE. Like you've got your games, you've got your dance, you've got your gymnastics, all that sort of stuff. It'll touch on all of those things anyway. But I think it could nearly be, here's your ABC of fundamental movement skills, and here's what I want you to do in junior infants, here's what I want you to do in senior, here's your sequence, and here's a barometer of where the kids should be. So definitely I think there's work we could do there, and there's enough research out there now at the moment that we could get to that scenario, right? But I think we have to look at the other pillars, like the other stakeholders. So parents are huge, right? Kids are the biggest mimickers going, right? Did you ever see that picture, the two owl lads walking down the street with their hands behind their back, and then the 4-year-old walking behind them copying? Like, kids will copy them. Then kids' habits are formed at an early age. Like, so be active with your kids. People always go to me, Jesus, I have to worry about kids now. They're reading, they're writing, and now I have to worry about these movement skills. Forget about the terminology. Just go out and play with your kids. Bring them out for a game of football. Bring them out for a run. Bring them out to the playground. Whatever they like doing. Just, if you're doing that, you're 90% there, right? There's loads of resources. We talked earlier on. There's loads of drills out there. There's loads of activities. There's loads of resources. Do that. But just the simple act of playing with them and being active around them, that'll instill that this is the norm. This is, being active is part of our lives. The other part of that is the community element. So sports clubs, I said earlier on, coaches are underappreciated. I think teachers and coaches throughout this COVID thing now will hopefully come out of that being more appreciated for the work that they do, and the volunteer coaches in all the sports across the country and activities, they're phenomenal. They're heroes, most of them. And then on the other side of the thing, then from a societal level, from a government level, we need to be looking at communities where it's not as easy or there's not as much opportunity, because with all the goodwill in the world, if there's no opportunity to be active, if there's no resources, if there's no green space, if there's no playgrounds, if there's no sports clubs, if there's no sports halls, like, for all the goodwill in the world and all the good teachers, parents, etc. do, if there's nowhere to do it, then we're failing the kids. So, sorry, I got a bit abstract there on you, John.
Oh no, that's fine. Now, I'm the first to agree as well that teachers can get an awful lot of very unfair blame for stuff like this. I also think though as well that if you picked out the worst primary teacher in the country and all they did was think back to when they were 4, 5 and 6, what memories they'd have, I don't know, and just did the same thing, they'd manage a bit of reading, they'd manage a bit of maths, they'd manage a bit of all like that, but there probably was no fundamental movement skill stuff done. Whereas I think to put it more of a core component on the curriculum, that eventually it would become part of the overall culture that yes, this is something we develop. And because it'll tick so many of the PE boxes, and it doesn't need to be every day, I'd love if it was, but it doesn't need to be. But if you get 2.5 hours a week, that could bring things on an awful lot and would eventually embed that culture. The other thing I'd really like to see, and I think there's obviously going to be issues with this and unions and all like that, I would love to see specialised PE teachers in primary schools. I know, like in big schools you could just have one there. Where I am, and we have 3 schools of about 20 each, they probably would be on the road, and there are like logistical things and stuff there that would impact it. But I think it would take years to see. To measure fundamental movement skills, you'd probably see it quick enough. But impact long-term health of the nation, I'd say 16 years later, we'd probably triple our Olympic medals as well, if you want to look at it like on a Russian success style thing. But I think the impact of that could be huge, but to actually see that happen, I think is a long way off, if at all.
Like specialized primary teachers, I don't know, like primary, like I've been all over it. Like I've been in an awful lot of schools and I've talked to an awful lot of teachers. Like the majority of them are brilliant. Like they're brilliant, and most, like nearly all of them have the best interests of the kids at heart. And like what I think what we tried to do with Moving Well Being Well, and I hope we achieved it, and it's by nowhere near perfect, but we're getting better every time we do it. What we're trying to do is give something really, really simple, really, really tangible, and give them a way of measuring success. And like the teachers that took part in that initial trial for us, I never forget, and this is anecdotal, like it's not something we measured, but I never forget chatting to a couple of them afterwards. Very non-sporty, as in, and PE would have been a subject where they didn't particularly, not that they didn't do it, but it wouldn't be something that they particularly enjoyed doing. They preferred, let's say, doing the arts and stuff like that, which is absolutely fine. Everyone has like favorites and strengths. Everyone's human. But the confidence they gained, that they told us that they gained from it, right? They were delighted with it. Do you know what I mean? And these weren't teachers that are just out of college or anything like that. These are teachers that are around a long time. And I think oftentimes when we talk about, let's get the kids moving and let's get all that sort of stuff, but we don't want to forget about the teachers as well. We can improve their confidence in these things. And to be fair, the PDST PE have that move well, move often program, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant, right? And they're brilliant. The associates are brilliant at what they do. And I think I wouldn't give up hope on primary teachers, as in, I think with a little bit more help and a little bit more support, we could make a big change, you know?
I think having it as a metric as well that they have to meet validates teachers kind of including it. So if you say, for example, if you have a young teacher who is quite sporty and does like coaching, they're more happy to include more coaching or more movement skills because they know it's something they'll be measured against. Whereas maybe starting out, if you're a young teacher, you know, right, the kids are going to be measured on reading, writing, maths, so I just had to focus as much time on that. And maybe PE or movement will fall by the wayside because it's not necessarily something that they'll be graded on. Or like if it's more tangible, it's more something that you have to put in regardless of your kind of feelings towards it. Yeah,
100%. And John, as you said there, where do you think in big picture? Big picture, it like the dream for moving well, being well, is that we've tweaked that intervention now to where we think it's at a really, really solid state. And big picture, we would love to just roll that out everywhere. Like give it to as many schools as would want it, and just get out there and just provide that bit of support and provide that bit of assurance that you're doing, if you're doing this, you're going to be relatively on the right track in terms of getting kids active. And then from the researcher side of me, I'd love to then track it in terms of like let's create this living database of tracking all these things. Like they do it unbelievably well in Scandinavia. Like they do it at their equivalent of first class, and they do their equivalent of fifth class, and they've identified like 7 or 8 key metrics. So not just reading or writing literacy or maths or anything like that. They look at physical stuff as well, and I think that's a really good way to go at it and look at, okay, here's where we were, we've improved a bit, and we're getting there. And as you say, John, then you really see the impacts then 10, 20 years down the line in terms of the health system and not being under as much pressure as it needs to be, and people just being healthier and having better well-being and all that good stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting point by Shane, that like if there is something to measure against, it does put an onus back on people. You obviously don't want it to become something that they're teaching to the test, which, like, you know, it even sort of sums up how many negative impacts that can have. I also think of a teacher in Kilkenny there beside me who just valued the school's performance at primary school level in hurling so much that by the time most of them got to secondary school, like a lot of students couldn't really read or write that well, but they were all well able to win their own ball.
Well, priorities, John, priorities.
Served Kilkenny well enough.
I know we've taken up a good bit of your time there, Stephen. We were hoping to dig into a bit more on the podcast you host. If you just want to give us a brief little plug for it there, so if you can maybe switch across to that and some of the guests you've had.
The coaching bubble. Do it myself and Niall Williams. Niall is
he's like your Jamie. So Joe Rogan has Jamie to do stuff in the background. You have Niall for that.
Well, he's taken to call on himself executive producer these days, you know. So I know, no, it's great. Niall asked me to do this. It must be 3 years ago now. We're recording season 4 at the moment. It's just really enjoyable. Like it's no more than yourselves. I'd say you just enjoy the chats. I love talking about coaching, and I get now to spend an hour over the next few weeks, an hour a week. Talking to some really cool people who have done some really cool things, and it's really, really interesting. Our whole aim is breaking it down. Like there's loads of elite coaching podcasts or elite master, like Finding Mastery is a podcast I love, Michael Gervais, and that's at the elite end, and that's fantastic. But our whole aim is, and we sometimes forget, but what we try to do all the time is break it down for a grassroots coach. So you get this elite performer, but how can we break down what they're doing so that a grassroots coach could actually implement something of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. Because even thinking back to examples, you mentioned earlier Dr. Seamus Kelly, who's like very high up in terms of coaching, research, and knowing the literature and all like that. But then he comes in and gives a good example, like it's about bonding your team. And bonding your team isn't going out in a session. It's breaking them into groups, watching a video, teasing out what we did well, teasing out what we need to work on. And they're bonding, but they're also bonding through something that's proactively going to help their performance. And everyone, like no matter what age group you're at, you can be like, oh, I could actually take that back and work with my team immediately.
Yeah, and do you know what? What's really been interesting to me over the years is all the top people that we've had on and the various different aspects of what they do in whatever sport they do or whatever like sort of niche they have within that sport. The commonalities across them is mental. Like it's crazy. Like they all self-reflect. So they all reflect on their coaching practice, and they all try and get a mentor or a buddy type of a thing in terms of bouncing ideas off or bouncing their reflections off and getting that sort of stuff. They all are athlete or person centered. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it's gas because you read something like that in terms of the All Blacks or legacy, as in good people make good All Blacks. But these are top coaches and they're living it. You know, it's not just a phrase on the gym wall, and it's amazing. And like Liam Moggan, Liam's brilliant. Like, and you talk to him for hours, and he's so enthusiastic, and but he just talks about like you're coaching people first and foremost. The sport is secondary, and the amount of people who said something similar, and he just talks about like at the end of the day, he talks about one of his greatest successes. This is someone who has like All Irelands, and he's beaten Ken Doherty in snooker and like athletics, massive list of success. And he classes one of his best successes is he sees a guy he used to teach running 3 or 4 days a week, and the guy said to him that Liam had instilled that love of running for him in his teenage years as a PE teacher. And like he classes that as one of his biggest successes. Like that's like, imagine being that humble after all the success he's had. Like that's, for me, like that's just class. And that type of stuff is that the learnings you get from things like that is huge. Tommy Dunn, Tipperary hurling coach, he uses fun and enjoyment as a measure of success in his coaching. There's someone who's done it all at the top of his game, and he still uses fun and enjoyment for both himself and the players as a measure of success.
No, it's a brilliant podcast, and the variety of guests are brilliant as well. And it's not just they kind of wax lyrical about philosophies and stuff. They give you stuff to take away that you can implement immediately. It's absolutely brilliant as well. Lovely. No, thanks a million for your time, Stephen. They can look you up on the Coaching Bubble, Moving Well, Being Well stuff, yourself on Twitter, all like that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, lads.